This is Dishant from UNECA University Common Application. I recommend you to watch AAU television.
AAU TV is the place to be for every person in higher education in Africa. Better be there or be nowhere.
Continuez de regarder la télé et surtout sur le AAU.
Keep watching it and it will change the way you interact with higher education on the continent. AAU, great job.
I want to tell you that AAU television is fantastic, it's educative, it's informative, and it is a must for anybody who is interested in higher education in Africa.
When I was in Accra last year, I did an interview on this TV. It's a very important mouthpiece.
It's a data, it's a bank of all we need for the development of higher education in Africa.
People should make an effort to view it because it discusses very current issues of development across the continent.
I believe that the station will continue to promote the overall development of Africa, particularly in the tertiary education sector.
AAU TV provides a platform and shares a lot of information to a broader audience. So we wish you all the best and please continue serving AAU TV,
the voice of higher education in Africa.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm here, sir. And
please, can you go ahead and to give your remarks here?
Well, thank you so very much, moderator. Thank you, Joe, for this very wonderful opportunity. But let me start by introducing myself, Jean-Bertrand Azapmon. I am the principal advisor to His Excellency Albert Muchanga, the African Union Commissioner for Economic Development, Trade, Tourism, Industry, and Minerals. Let me also continue by expressing my deep appreciation for this opportunity, acknowledging the presence of the Deputy ES, the acting ES, and because I don't have any clear understanding of who is in the room, I will just continue by saying all protocol observed. So the occasion that brings us together is a very important one, very opportune, because as we all are aware, we are commemorating this year the year of the acceleration of the African Continental Free Trade Area, one of the flagship programs of Agenda 2063, a baby that we did nurture at the African Union Commission in our department, and it is now up and running in Accra, Ghana. And the AFCFTA stands as one of the most formidable projects that the continent has put together over the past decade in terms of moving towards the realization of the dreams of our forefathers in terms of achieving African unity. And it speaks to the theme that we are gathered around today, which is Africa integrating or disintegrating? I think Commissioner Muchanga will be asking the question whether Africa is defragmenting itself or whether it's actually continue to be a fragmented continent, which are also synonymous to integrating and disintegrating. What is very interesting also today is we are living in a context where the world is moving towards greater unity in various parts, despite the fact that we're also seeing a lot of disruptions around. So if you look at what is happening in a country like India, they are talking about implementing fiscal reforms to achieve a common market. If you look at China, it's the same thinking that is, of course, they already have that one country, but it's about further integrating the country. Same for the European Union, where despite the Brexit and the crisis that Europe is going through, there is a realization that the immediate future lies in further strengthening the European integration project or program. So for Africa, there is no other answer to this in the new international environment in which we're living than accelerating our own regional or continental integration. Of course, there are challenges that lie ahead. And one of the most important challenge is actually within self, that is within the continent. And that is the realization that, yes, this is the only option we have. Either we strengthen, we fast-track the AFCFTA program in terms of fully committing ourselves, whether at the national, regional, or continental level, to build it, and then we will be integrating ourselves, we will be defragmenting the continent, or because of skepticism, because of low self-esteem, because of little understanding of the challenges, the implications, we then take a different path, and that will be leading us towards disintegration or towards remaining a fragmented continent. I believe the contribution that Joe made to the UNECA agenda, the African integration agenda in general, was actually aimed at, advancing the objective of integrating the continent. And I also believe, and this is the strong belief of my boss, Commissioner Muchanga, that despite the fact that Joe is retiring, that UNECA will continue pushing this agenda, of course, working in close collaboration with the African Union Commission, the AFCFTA Secretariat in Accra, and that our various institutions will continue working towards ensuring that Africa really move strongly and resolutely towards integration. What we can really count on today is the potential that the continent has. Today, Africa accounts for 17% of the world population, and all estimates show that by 2050, we will be 25%. And by the end of the century, you will be looking at around 38 to 40% of the global population. And we have a young and vibrant population also. So capitalizing on all those potentials, I don't want to look at the other potentials, in terms of natural endowment or in terms of the economic performance that some of our countries are posting today. But I just want to conclude by saying that we at the African Union Commission, we are working on a number of programs to accelerate the integration of the continent, one of which is the joint study that we are undertaking on readiness assessment to move towards an African customs/common market. Because we do believe that the AFCFTA is just a stepping stone, as we all know, under the Abuja Treaty. And one way to really secure or to really protect the AFCFTA, it is to make sure we move quickly towards the African Customs Union/common market. There are already some elements which are in place, whether in terms of movement of persons, in terms of harmonizations of various policies. We want to build on that to make the case for the need to accelerate the Africa integration. And I think UNECA also is working on similar project. The next area report will be also focusing on moving towards the African Customs Union/common market. So To conclude, Your Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, just want to once again express our own appreciation to the work that Joe undertook during the many years of servicing UNECA and the continent, and also express our readiness to continue working with UNECA, all the other organization, the Secretariat, the regional economic communities to advance this program. And we hope, since the acting ES said he doesn't really look tired, we hope to continue benefiting from his expertise in a different capacity and in different settings. So once again, thank you for the opportunity, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jim Bertrand Azampmo. Please extend our warm regards to His Excellency, Mr. Albert Muchanga. We'll move on straight to the next intervention by Her Excellency, Ms. Samira Bawumia, the wife of the Vice President of the Republic of Ghana. Madam, you have the floor, please.
She's not there.
We'll move on to the next. I think there are connection problems. We'll invite His Excellency, Mr. Rasmus Wancha, Chair of the ACBF Executive Board and former Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission. His Excellency, Mr. Wancha, you have the floor, please. I hope you are connected.
I am. Are you getting me?
Yes.
Oh, thank
yes,
you
we
very
can hear
much.
you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, moderator. And I also acknowledge the presence of the acting executive secretary and the many dignitaries that have come to this auspicious occasion. As you have introduced me, I served as the Commercial Secretary General. It is at that time that I got to know Joe. And then later on, I worked very closely with him when I was Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission. I am therefore very much privileged to have known Joe for the longest of time, having worked with him when I was at the REC, Regional Economic Community. And as you know, regional economic communities were initially set up by the ECA. I personally was recruited by the ECA to join COMESA at that time, which was PTA. And so I've had a long association with ECA during that period. And now let me address Joe and simply say, as we bid you farewell today, it is with profound sense of admiration and gratitude that we reflect upon your remarkable journey and the invaluable contribution that you have made to regional economic integration in Africa. Your distinguished service and unwavering commitment to fostering cooperation and development have left an indelible mark to our continent and has touched many lives. Throughout your tenure, you have exemplified the true sense of patriotism to the Pan-African spirit by harnessing your expertise and vision to drive a transformative agenda for the continent. Your unwavering dedication to advancing regional economic integration has been instrumental in shaping policies and forging partnerships and fostering regional economic integration. Your tireless efforts have not only facilitated trade and investment, but also encouraged social and cultural exchanges that have brought our diverse nations closer together. Your exceptional accomplishments stand as a testimony to your deep understanding of the complex challenges facing Africa and your unwavering determination to overcome them. You made immense contributions to various initiatives of the continent, some of which have been highlighted by the previous speaker who has spoken on behalf of the Commissioner for Trade. I remember very well being a scholar that always looked forward to reading the area studies. These are really very, very well done studies that have continued to inform and become a source of data and scholarly analysis for the continent, but also to the various protocols in Africa, including the protocol on the Continental Free Trade Area. And I remember when we started initially that process of laying the foundation for the Continental Free Trade Area, the ECA, and through that effort, Joe himself made immense contribution. Joe was also involved in the study for alternative sources of funding for the continent, but also in putting together a framework for cooperation among the premier institutions of the continent, including the African Development Bank, the ECA, and the regional economic communities. So he has really been a towering symbol for the continent in serving and bringing the various institutions to contribute their various strengths to navigate the intricate and ever-evolving global landscape. But beyond professional achievement, Joe has some personal qualities that attract many to him. He has endeared himself as a warm, humble, and genuine person of concern, who has also created a nurturing atmosphere, particularly for those who work below him. He is one person who has also been able to overcome many challenges. Even in his career, those of you may have known it, Joe was never about position, but was known for his focus on the mission. And that's why he was able to overcome some of those. And Joe understands when I say that, because there were times that he and I shared many tribulations, particularly when some of the challenges came along his way. But he was able to see beyond those challenges and see how he wanted to serve Africa. Somebody has just said that he looks young. Joe does actually. He still has a lot of energy. And I hope and look forward that, like many of us who have been in this journey before, we found that the end is not just simply when you leave those institutions, but there is a lot more to do, even beyond those institutions. And Joe, I look forward to working with you in other areas, and I'm sure there will be men that will be beckoning on you to continue to give you intellectual acumen and visionary thinking as we continue to better for the betterment of Africa. I, therefore, personally want to extend the deepest appreciation for the remarkable service that Joe has rendered the continent, and also some sense of gratitude for the countless ways in which you have enriched our lives, and also many that you probably may not even know. Joe, I can only say, my dear brother, you depart with your head and shoulder high, and may the future continue to hold bigger promises for you. You have done the best that could be done by any individual in the continent, and may the generations to come emulate you, but also benefit from the legacy that you have left behind. And it is with that and the deepest respect and warmest regards that I just feel honored to have been invited to speak at this very important occasion, Joe. Thank you very much, moderator.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We'll move on to the next intervention. I'm advised that Her Excellency Ms. Samira Bawumia, the wife of the Vice President of Ghana, is online. Madam, if you are connected, can you kindly take the floor?
Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
All right, thank you. Mr. Moderator, Acting Executive Secretary, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for having me. Unfortunately, my husband could not be with you today because of an important national assignment. Nonetheless, he sends his unqualified apologies and regrets that he cannot be here to celebrate his brother, Joe Attah Mensah. It's his loss and it's my gain because I get to be here today. So thank you once again. Our topic is a compelling one because the green economy forms one of the two substantive items on the agenda for the forthcoming United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, also known as Rio +20, which will be taking place in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, in just under a year. Moreover, recurring crises in food, fuel, finance, and climate change events have highlighted the need to adopt new approaches to growth. In addition, the debates that we have had on the theme so far shows that several constituencies are still struggling to reach a common understanding of what the green economy means for the sustainable development agenda. Some people wonder why the switch to talking about a green economy if it means the same thing as the tried and tested notion of sustainable development. Fortunately, we do not have to grapple with such differences of opinion, as our focus is on green growth, which fits well under the rubric of sustainable development. There is now no debate about the need to rethink the existing growth paradigm, given the challenges of environmental sustainability, such as climate change, degradation of natural resources, and the loss of biodiversity. It is now evident to all that humanity needs to move from old resource-intensive methods of growth in which progress has been at the expense of the environment to one in which productivity is boosted by using and managing natural resources more efficiently and effectively. At the same time, economic activity must take account of long-term consequences for the environment, while we also reconsider ways of measuring progress to take account of other factors, including the environmental quality of life. Green growth is therefore an important element of the solution. Despite the attractive argument that switching to a green growth path may enable leapfrogging of dirty and inefficient technologies, I would posit that it poses more fundamental dilemmas, which is why we must pay attention to the governance of the process of sustainable development. To start with, transition to a green growth paradigm poses problems of path dependence. It also has implications for efforts to reduce poverty and create jobs, and may give cause for concern about trade protectionism and policy conditionality. Existing economic structures are path dependent in the sense that it is easier to use existing structures in which accompanying technologies, skills, practices, and processes are locked in rather than change to a green growth trajectory. Radical changes will be required in behavior from government, firms, and consumers, but the process... Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, madam, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
This also means that the more developed economies would have the initial advantage of our developing countries because they have the resources and technological capabilities needed to undertake required changes. Governance frameworks for green growth would need to take these considerations into account. The pressing priority for African countries is to promote growth that can create jobs and help meet the MDGs. Such efforts to improve welfare will entail an increase in consumption of food, energy, and water. But given the way that humanity has met these needs up until now, it is inevitable in the short run that growth in developing economies will add to the burden on the environment. It will accordingly be important to fashion policies for transitioning in the short term to sustainable development using already existing opportunities, while also undertaking long-term investment policies for green growth. The important thing here would be striking the right balance. Even the now increasingly welcome approach of building hydroelectric dams, which are of low carbon intensity, may attract concerns by about environmental degradation. There are also legitimate concerns about the potential harm of the regulatory framework that would need to be drawn up to promote green growth. Certain policies would need to be adopted in order to give further momentum to the process of green growth, either by promoting certain technologies or standards or prohibiting some existing practices. There is a legitimate fear that such policies may not only lead to a loss of competitiveness, but also allow for trade protectionism and the imposition of additional policy conditionalities for official development assistance of debt relief. This again points to the importance of governance mechanisms. Against this background, ladies and gentlemen, African countries have espoused and adhered to the path of green growth. This was affirmed at this year's AU-ECA's Conference of African Ministers responsible for finance and economic planning. The ministers at this meeting underscored their commitment to exploit new models of growth that is much less intensive in natural resources and that can lead to social well-being and poverty reduction in Africa, at the same time finding the right balance between economic growth and preserving the environmental integrity. We must note that it is early days to report African success stories. However, the commitment to the ministers is anchored on 4 key principles for sustainable development governance. The first, green growth will be best promoted by building its international development plans and strategies. In addition to providing a vision, such a step will give the right signal to other economic actors in terms of coordination and forward planning of their own activities. Similarly, it will help to determine what balance of market and price-based instruments versus government regulation should guide green growth activities. We already have the good example of our host country, Korea, which has a national strategy for green growth. In Africa, several countries, including South Africa, Kenya, Rwanda, Mozambique, and Morocco, have also taken similar steps. The second point relates to on the one hand, to finding appropriate policies to overcome existing constraints to green growth, especially a path dependence, while fostering investment and innovation on the other. To change behavior in favor of green growth, it will be necessary to have a policy framework that encourages retraining and retooling, possibly through the use of subsidies, as well as preventing or prohibiting certain outcomes, such as the limitation of carbon dioxide emissions. On the more positive side, innovation will be required in thinking about how to use existing processes and technologies in a more environmentally friendly way, as well as in promoting public and private investment and the development of new technologies. Third, it will be important that the governance of green growth is inclusive of all sectors and stakeholders. All sectors of the economy should be part of the green growth agenda, such as the people to be most affected by the proposed changes should be consulted to obtain their buy-in. There is a social dimension to sustainable development, which must ensure the access of poor people to food, water, energy, education, and healthcare. And finally, the fourth is the international dimension of governing sustainable development. It is important that we act to strengthen international governance of the environment by promoting agreements that accompany rather than hinder green growth. In this regard, we should not let environmental regulations become another form of trade protectionism. Rather, we must and should seek to promote and adopt global norms that make it easier to produce and trade in green goods. The provision of finance through international frameworks is also important, since substantial funds will be required to fund the green growth process. Various scenarios show that huge amounts are needed for having carbon dioxide emissions or for undertaking clean energy transitions and investments. The establishment of a green climate fund in Cancun is a first step in helping to fund the transition to low carbon economies, but this must be complemented by public and private investment from those with the resources to support green growth in developing economies. In this regard, Africa supports the establishment of the Africa Green Fund within the African Development Fund. It is obvious that success in promoting green growth depends greatly on how well we govern sustainable development. And to quote the Global Footprint Network, sustainability will remain elusive if we do not design ways to live within the means of one planet, and sustainability will remain equally elusive if there is no hope for all for a better life on that one planet, end quote. So let me end by commending the ECA's commitment to collaborate closely with the African Union to solidify the continental green growth agenda. We shall also use our advisory services to provide technical support for the implementation of the agenda by our member states. I thank you all, but before I leave, let me once again congratulate Joe Attah Mensah for a sterling and remarkable career. Joe, we're really proud of you, and we wish you the very best in the years to come. Thank you all for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency, Ms. Samira Bawumia, the wife of the Vice President of Ghana. I would like to appeal to our distinguished personalities that for you to be kindly brief so that we can have enough time for Joe to make his presentation, because that's the essence of why we're here. I would like to call on Dr. Maxwell Kuzulamba, the former Finance Minister of Malawi and former AU Commissioner for Economic Affairs. Dr. Maxwell, you have the floor.
Hello, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Our guest of honor, Mr. Joe Attah Mensah. Of course, I also wish to acknowledge the presence of the Acting Executive Secretary of the ECA, and I also took note of the presence of the former Deputy Chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Erastus Mwencha, colleagues and friends. I must say that I'm very excited to be here to be part of this seminar in honor of our brother, Mr. Joseph Attah Mensah. And I wish to thank the organizers for having invited me to attend this seminar, as well as make some remarks. I must say that Mr. Attah Mensah and I have known each other since my days at the African Union Commission, where I served as Commissioner for Economic Affairs between April 2004 and April 2013. Since leaving the African Union Commission, we have continued to remain in contact. As a staff member of the Economic Commission for Africa, Mr. Attah Mensah worked closely, diligently, and tirelessly with the African Union Commission, and in particular the Department of Economic Affairs, which I headed, as well as the Department of Trade and Industry, which I also worked in collaboration with. And this was in helping to forge ahead Africa's regional integration and development agenda. There were times, indeed, when Mr. Attah Mensah could be mistaken for a staff member of the African Union Commission simply because of his regular presence within the African Union Commission compound. And I think this has also been testified by His Excellency Erastus Mwencha, as well as the acting ES, who indicated that Mr. Joe Mensah was actually a door to the African Union Commission. He remained enthusiastic and passionate about his work in the area of economic integration. There were a number of areas and activities in which the African Commission, in particular, the two departments that I mentioned, benefited from Mr. Attah Mensah's expertise and contributions. And I wish to actually highlight some of the areas and activities as the following: publication of the annual AU ECA flagship report on assessing regional integration in Africa under the guidance of the leadership of the two Pan-African institutions, the preparation of the African Union Millennium Minimum Integration Program between 2009 and 2010, rationalization of the regional economic communities, which was the theme of the 2006 African Union Summit of Heads of State and Government held in the Banjul, the Gambia, as well as the organization of the Conference of African Ministers in charge of integration. I think we did this for the first time together, and Joe was also at the center of it all. There was also the technical work on the establishment of the three Pan-African financial institutions, something that has also been alluded to by Mr. Mensah, namely the African Central Bank, the African Monetary Fund, as well as the African Investment Bank. I must say that at that time, there was some skepticism about the establishment of these institutions, but Mr. Attah Mensah was in the forefront of this work in support of the African Union. And again, the issue of alternative funding sources for the African Union, which was also alluded to by Mr. Mensah, which we did under the guidance of H.E. Olusegun Obasanjo, former president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We were always with Mr. Attah Mensah, as well as the establishment, of course, of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Mr. Attah Mensah worked very well with the African Union Commission in a professional and dedicated manner, applying his knowledge and expertise, as well as diplomatic skills in support of the African integration agenda. It is therefore befitting and commendable that we are all here today under the auspices of the Economic Commission for Africa to honor a son of Africa who has contributed immensely to deepening Africa's integration and development. Congratulations, Mr. Attah Mensah, for your commendable work in promoting regional integration in Africa, and thanks to the Economic Commission for Africa for honoring Mr. Attah Mensah with this farewell seminar. Briefly commenting on the topic of this seminar, is Africa integrating or disintegrating? A reflection of the last 20 years and the future. I must say that this is a relevant and pertinent topic, given where we are on the journey to integrating African economies and addressing the various socioeconomic challenges facing the continent. It is critical that this seminar reflects on a number of issues about regional integration. In doing so, I hope, led by the seminar presentation of Mr. Attah Mensah, we can establish whether indeed Africa is integrating or disintegrating. If you were to ask me, I think, Africa is integrating, albeit slowly. Obviously because of a number of challenges that we face, including those relating to financing the African Union, but also the capacities at the level of the member states, the regional economic communities, but also our continental organization. I think in the interest of time, Mr. Moderator, all I would need to do now is to wish my brother Joe a happy retirement and look forward to our continued engagement. For I know, like me, he's not tired, and therefore, all the best, brother Joe. May God continue blessing you. I thank you.
Thank you very much, His Excellency, Dr. Maxwell. I'll move on to the next distinguished guest that we have, and that's Dr. Hakim Ben Ammouda, the former Minister of Finance of Tunisia, and who happened to also be a director and ECA here for many years. Dr. Hakim Ben Ammouda, you have the floor.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
You are
Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and I would like to salute the friends of the ECA and the acting executive secretary, my brother Pedro, for this initiative, and to pay tribute to Joe's huge contribution to the work of the institution and to the dynamics of regional integration in Africa. My greetings also to all the ECA colleagues present in this important event. I would like also to take this opportunity to salute my bosses, Mr. K.Y. Amwako, Mr. Jani, and Mr. Kabaruka, who have placed their trust in me and opened the doors for me to contribute to our continent march towards its future. I'm also delighted to be here to acknowledge the contribution of someone who has become a brother and a family member to me. Joe has always shown great professionalism, great commitment to the continent, but also great empathy with all his colleagues. This made him everyone's friend. Joe's contribution to the integration dynamic is huge. Joe joined the ECA at a crucial moment of the integration process. From my perspective, and it seems to me that this long history of integration, there are three major moments. The first moment began in the 1970s, where integration was first envisioned as a strategic perspective in Africa's development, and in which the ECA played an essential role under the leadership of Professor Adedeji. The second moment is an analytical one, and began with the arrival ECA with Dr. Amwaku as a head of the ECA. With the launch, as Max was saying, the areas reports. The aim of these reports is to really understand the reasons for the delay in the integration dynamic. It was at this point that Joe arrived at the ECA and took responsibility of this work, working closely with the REX and more particularly with Dr. Ibn Shambas, who was the head of the ECOWAS, but also in close collaboration with the African AUC and the African Development Bank. This analytical moment made it possible to build a consensus on the reforms needed to accelerate the integration. This moment opened a new period, the third moment in this dynamic. Sorry? Are you hearing me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you. The analytical moment made the second moment, means the analytical one, made it possible to build the consensus on the reforms needed to accelerate the integration. This moment opened a third one, a new period in this dynamic, that of the policies and the institution to be put in place to build integration. Some of these institutions, Max enumerated some of these institutions. This work began in the mid of the thousands under the leadership of Mr. Jani at the ECA, Dr. Kabaruka at the African Development Bank, Mr. Mwansha and Max at the AUC, and Franny Lotier at the ACBA. This was also, I think, a critical moment where Joe's contribution was really made excellent and with a huge importance to the dynamic of the regional integration. This moment, this political policy moment, has produced results, and recently the last one is the African Continental Free Trade Area. A long history of integration in our continent, with advances, but successes, but at the same time some delays and some failures, and in which Joe's contribution has been important and critical. Joe will be leaving the ECA, but I'm sure his commitment to integration will continue, and we will see Joe with us in the different meetings of the AUC, the ECA, and the African Development Bank, giving us his thinking, his ideas, on how to really go beyond the difficulties in the process of regional integration, and how to overcome the forces of disintegration and to strengthen, in fact, the forces of integration. Again, Joe, thank you for all what you did. Thank you for all the support you gave me when I was. In fact, I was never your director. He was always my boss. So thank you again. You, Joe, Stephen, I think is around the table. And thank you to all of you and all the colleagues. Nassim, I think, is around. And listening, I can't forget Robin. and all the colleagues for the help, the support you gave me when I was in ECA. Thank you again. And Pedro, again, thank you for this initiative. And I think it should really be an ECA tradition, organizing seminars about the contribution of the colleagues, and don't let and give the opportunity, in fact, to highlight the contribution of the colleagues when they are leaving the institution. Thank you again, and we keep in touch.
Thank you very much, Akim. I'm not sure whether Joe was your boss when you were here. I think you are Joe's boss. Thank you very much for your remarks about Joe. We'll move on to two other distinguished personalities before we give Joe the floor. In the interest of time and in order for us to listen to Joe, I think we need to manage time. I would like to invite His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambers to take the floor. He's currently the AU High Commissioner, High Representative for Silencing the Gun. He was president of the ECOWAS Commission in Abuja, Nigeria, and he was also a UN Under-Secretary General in charge of the UN UNOA office in Dakar, Senegal. Dr. Chambers, I hope you're there.
Yes, I am, and thank you for the floor. And I want to start by saying that the fact that Joe's former bosses, starting with Akim and then going through Ablajane, our brother, KY, and indeed the current acting executive secretary, Pedro, that they are all, along with other high personalities, participating in this speaks volumes to the caliber, the high caliber of the man we are toasting today. Over the years, Joe has served the UN, ECA, and Africa with distinction. We have heard from previous speakers, all extolling his virtues. He has indeed been prolific, publishing and maintaining his credentials as a reputable economist. More importantly, Joe's work has been relevant and had impact on the many important reforms on our continent in the areas of regional integration, trade, the EPAs, the AFTA, governance, financing of our constitution, of our continental institutions, you can name it. He has been a practical economist seeking to make important efforts that transform our African reality for the benefit of its peoples. And when I was at the ECOWAS, I can testify, as indeed has been mentioned already, to important work that Joe contributed to as we sought to transform from a secretariat to a commission, and in some of our other endeavors. And where Joe essentially was the focal point of the ECA in its very active and dynamic relations with ECOWAS. And in that regard, the UNECA was instrumental for the institutional transformation of ECOWAS from a secretariat to a commission. And our chair today, Said, you yourself, you were with us at ECOWAS, and you can testify to that. Also, in the difficult and often tumultuous EPAs, the EPA negotiations between West Africa and EU, the UNECA at the time provided much needed trade and economic analysis. And Joe, once again, was very crucial and very central to this process. I also want to refer to the period that I was in Dakar as the SRSG of ECOWAS, when I was involved in the Gambian transition, when the Gambian people had spoken and Yahya Jammeh was out and President Adama Barrow had assumed power. In that transition, we were working to have a cabinet retreat. And when we approached the UNECA and the UNDP to help, indeed, Joe led that process and very speedily was able to put together not only the financial resources, but to identify the resource persons, both from UNECA and UNDP, who came to Banjul to help put together what turned out to be a very successful cabinet retreat for President Adama Barrow. So in all of this, you can see that Joe has been extremely dynamic. More recently, again, I can testify as a witness to Joe's indefatigable role in working with the government of Ghana to host the African Continental Free Trade Agreement Secretariat in Accra. A lot of hard behind-the-scenes work was involved implementing the decision of the AU to host the headquarters in Accra. And I think that it was fortuitous to have a Ghanaian Pan-African in the person of Joe, who also is a strong advocate for intra-African trade. And Joe used his strong contacts with Ghanaian high-level personalities to facilitate the task at hand. We owe him a great debt of gratitude for the establishment of the headquarters of AFTA in good time and to get it off and running. On a personal note, if I can conclude with that, Joe, without doubt, as we have heard already, is a gentleman par excellence. He's a loyal friend. If Joe hasn't heard from you for a while, he will reach out to check on you. And if Joe is ever in a location he knows you to be, he'll go through all the trouble to wait for me. Joe, we appreciate you for your professionalism, for your strong Pan-Africanism, your solid contributions to the African integration process, intellectually and practically. Above all, we appreciate you for being such a charming human being, a person of high integrity, honesty, and empathy. I wish you a blissful retirement, but as Pedro and I believe my brother Wencha and Maxwell have all reminded you, Joe, you are still young at heart, and you may be retired, but you certainly are not tired. Africa will still need you, and we look forward very much to continuing to work with you in our different capacities, both professionally, but also as a brother and friend that you are. Thank you, Joe. All the best to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambers. Joe is not still intellectually alert, even physically still strong. Joe, isn't that so? So we move on to our former boss, Dr. K.Y. Amalko, who was the former executive secretary of ECA and currently chair of the African Center for Economic Transformation based in Ghana. Brother KY, I do call him Brother KY. Brother KY, are you there?
I am here. Hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You have the, can you kindly put on your camera for current ECA staff to see you and know who you are?
My internet is a bit spotty, so if I put on camera, you probably won't hear me well. So let's go
okay.
Camera.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks all. It's a great opportunity to reconnect with many friends and colleagues from the past to
Breaking. We can't hear you. Dr. K.Y.
Putting out
Amalko.
this show.
You're back now.
Hello, Professor.
Please go ahead.
Hello.
We can hear you.
I want to
Please go
thank
ahead.
all of you for. I want to thank all. Very brief, as been said, but we're here to celebrate Joe's contribution to the ECA and in particular to Africa's regional integration. Joe has done an outstanding job, and from what I've heard from everybody, I don't need to repeat it. But I just want to go back to the beginning, how it came in, and some of the key things I did with him and with many of you before I left here, and all that has followed up then, and Joe's amazing contribution that all of you have attested to. So, Joe, congratulations, and thank you very much for all you have done, for the admiration that all of us have for you, and for your great contributions. We thank you. My next will be to say, when in my final, Joe came in, I left ECA 2005, and Joe came in 2004, I believe, or 2003. So it was, and I brought some of the integration others and side many of you on the agenda. And there were many things he did with us, with you, and followed up since I left, almost 15 years ago. Almost 20 years ago, I should say. First of all, was the whole issue of area, assessing regional integration in Africa. And we gave Joe that responsibility of preparing the first area. And as you recall, the objective of area to allow Africans and the RECs to track regional integration and to see what needed to do both at the policy and institutional level, and in particular, the role of the RECs. So area was a path-breaking effort, and I believe subsequently, I don't know how many areas have been prepared, but as I recall, maybe 10 or 11 areas. So that was a great step to thank Joe for his commitment and leadership. The second was the establishment of the African Trade Policy Center as the ECA, because we felt very strongly that the analytical work underpinning regional integration had to be continuous. So institutionally, ECA had to strengthen its own role in this important phase. So with the support of CIDA Canada, then, we created the African Trade Policy Center. It's been, I think, a very, very important one time. The third was for Joe to mission.
Dr. KY, the line is breaking. We can't hear you.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you now.
That's my. Yeah, I'm saying Joe in
Dr. KY, we cannot hear you. think the line has dropped. We can't hear you. Dr. Kewa, you are muted. I'm advised that you are muted. Can you unmute yourself, please? Of time, we have to move on, and when Dr. Kewa joins us again, we can give him the floor to complete his remarks. So we'll move on to the presentation itself. Joe will be speaking to us on the theme, is Africa integrating or disintegrating? A reflection over the last 20 years and the future. Joe, you have the floor.
Can you hear with the PowerPoint? I mean, after this point, with all
Joe, you have 20 minutes.
Yeah, I'll be. Don't worry. I'll get it done. Don't worry. This I'll say pressure. You know, after all these words from people who you admire so much and you learn from every day, and for them to say these things, I mean, I think the seminar should be over. What else can I add to this? And I would like to express my deepest gratitude to each one of them for the kind words. You know, what they were saying at times, I'm not even sure whether they were referring to me, because I don't know whether I deserve all that they said. But I appreciate the time. These are busy people. And for them to make time to come and speak to us, I'm grateful. I'm also grateful to you, Said. I'm grateful to you, Robert, who you thought about this and decided, sorry, I'm not the acting executive secretary. I'm sorry. Yeah. So anyway, so I'm grateful for putting this together. I'm grateful to the acting executive secretary for coming in. And Madam, I'm very grateful to you, Dr. Atta-Mensah, for making the time to be with us. And to you, colleagues, if I was successful, it's because of you. It is your inspiration. You inspired me each and every day to show up. Even in difficult times, we all work together. It was not. So I cannot get all this we are saying, although it's nice to hear, but it's because of you. It's because of the people that I worked with who always made it easier for me to shine. And I'm grateful to each one of you for that. So let me go straight. Next slide, please. I'll just be quick. And I think I'll spend more time on the recommendations. Next slide, please, Fitsum. We all know how we got here. Oh, is the slides not moving? Fitsum, please. Next slide. Okay, so we're stuck. Anyway, let me continue until it's corrected. Let me give a little bit of history as to how we got here. I mean, in terms of Africa. Sorry? Oh, okay.
We can see.
So you remember that in 1957, Ghana gained its independence, although I know the Sudanese want to say that they were the first because they got their independence in 1954. But Hamdok is not here, so I can say that we got that glory. You know, and if Hamdok is watching, I salute you, sir. When Nkrumah got his independence, he said, the independence of Ghana is meaningless. It's meaningless until it's linked to the total liberation of the continent. So that gave impetus, in terms of the fight to change the continent. At the time, there were two blocks. There was a Casablanca bloc, and there was the Casablanca bloc, which included people like Nkrumah. And this is why I'm so happy when Morocco came back, because their contribution to our unity can never be diminished because of being in part. And part of it also includes, Madam, your own president, Jamal Nasser, who were part of the Casablanca bloc, including Modibo Keita of Mali, including Sékou Touré of Guinea. These are the people who led us and saw that, and these people were advocating at the time. They wanted the erasure of the Act of Berlin in 1944, 1945, where some group of people started somewhere far from the continent and decided to draw the boundaries that we have today. And the Casablanca bloc wanted to remove that. But the Moravian bloc wanted gradual approach towards it. And unfortunately, so there was a meeting, next slide please, there was a meeting that prior had been called that had invited Emperor Haile Selassie to be, that was the Moravian bloc. But the emperor felt that if he showed up, because of the inspiration that Ethiopia gave to most of us, most of African countries, because Ethiopia was never colonized. And if you look at the flags of many African countries, particularly in the West, the red, gold, green, it is from Ethiopia, because they looked up to the emperor at the time. I'll not spend too much time. I'll work on this later on with others. So Nkrumah believed that Africa needed to unite or would perish. But how did we get the OAU to happen? The OAU came together because of the brilliance of Ethiopia's foreign minister at the time, Ketema. I can't remember his first name, Ketema, Yifru Ketema, who was able to bring the two parties together to do shuttle diplomacy with the blessing of the emperor, to bring everybody here, not far from where we are sitting, which is being renovated, to come together on May 25th, 1963. There were 32 African countries that were independent. When you go there, you see the map. The one which is missing is Olympio, because he had been assassinated, from Togo. They came together and decided that they would form the Organization of African Unity. So when anybody tells you that Africa will have not succeeded, or we are backwards, or our development agenda is slowing, tell them that when we got together in 1962, only 32 countries were liberated. So we decided, we formed 1970. I wish I was there at the time. We formed the liberation struggle at the time. That was the OAU's mandate. And that liberation office was in Tanzania. Next slide, please. And their four main focus was to get rid of colonialism on the continent, which they succeeded in 1994, with the last one being the apartheid regime of South Africa. Now, having said that, I'd like to pay tribute to an organization that has given me too much that I can give it back to, which is ECA. ECA should be proud of itself that in 1963, at the finance ministers' meeting in Khartoum, unfortunately, Khartoum is not the same now, we gave birth to what? The African Development Bank. That was ECA. And ECA has been very instrumental in the creation of a number of regional communities, regional economic communities. And so let's be proud of ourselves. Although we might say that we are dwelling on past glory, but we are capable of doing more. And we are doing more. There will be no AFCFTA, and I can vouch on that if there's one ECA. Next slide, please. So those who tend to shoot us down, please go back and see what ECA has done. And that is why we should come back and be strong and give more to the continent. How did we become OAU after 1904? I'm rushing quickly through because I want to get straight to where I want to be controversial. So this is the map that we have, right? In which how we got there. In SET's declaration of 9th September 1999, where the 1994 has come, apartheid is gone, Mandela has been elected. What we do now, Gaddafi then says, why don't you come over to SET? Let's get together and think about it, of how we're going to transform, because now we're not going to fight anymore. We have no colonialists to fight. So we wanted to focus now on a development agenda for African. So therefore, as a result of that, let's think through. So they went, and then they came back, the ministers, foreign ministers got together again in Tripoli. And then the first meeting, then they decided that they'll fashion out the Constitutive Act that is needed to set up the transformation from OAU. And here again, ECAU were instrumental. And as a result of that, they met in Lome to adopt the Constitutive Act. The last meeting of the OAU was in Lusaka in 2021. And that gave birth to also at the same meeting, the new Partnership for Africa's Development, or what you know as NEPAD. And what is NEPAD? NEPAD is basically the Obasanjo and Becky's national, what do you call it? NAI, I cannot remember. And Abdul Wad's Omega. And that was the amalgamation. And I think we should thank Mr. K.Y. Mwako for making sure that at this time, that he was able to come together to have a blueprint, which is known as NEPAD. Next slide, please. I want to rush. Next slide. So what is the imperative of regional integration? Throughout the work that we've done, why are we so crazy about integration? We are crazy about integration because the aspirations of many Africans are that what they need is that the 55 fragmented economies of this continent would come together as one powerful economy, which is robust, strong, diversified, resilient, and in which we have what? A first-class transboundary infrastructure, highly educated, flexible, and mobile workforce, which is the free movement, capital that is mobile, sound health facilities, and we live in peace and security. Next slide, please. And so, in terms of our agenda, you all know this. Next slide, please. I don't want to repeat it. The only thing you know now we are working on is basically what the Agenda 2063. But before then, we've gone through Lagos of Plan of Action and all that. What have we achieved with all this integration? Peter. And Robert knows very much about Peter, because there was a time when the AAU was born, 2002. It came in 2004. I was here. Robert and I, the commissioner then was called Commissioner Zoba. He was then in charge. And at the time, they were thinking that there were so many master plans. You know, every rec has its own master plan. And there was a need for us to have one continental master plan. So that master plan came together with with ECA being there, worked tirelessly to be able to get the program of infrastructure development for Africa. And so again, I owe everything that I know about infrastructure to this man sitting there. He's my teacher, Robert. And what have we achieved? A number of things have been done. They're doing well, but you know, progress is incremental. Next slide. Again, they have also working on a high-speed railway. We have the single Yamoussoukro decision, which is now thinking of a single air transport for the continent. And this is where I'll come back to the free movement of persons. We have a protocol, but the protocol is only 4 countries that have ratified. A number of them have signed, but we've not ratified them. But I'll come back to that. Next slide, please. And I just want to be quick. Give me next slide because my time. Oh, no, let me go back. The AFCFTA. The AFCFTA has achieved a lot. We have 47 countries that have ratified out of the 54. And my brother, Bingham of Eritrea, I hope that ECA can avail itself to you so that we can get Eritrea to sign and also ratify. He's watching he's online from the Eritrean embassy. He's my brother. Progress has been recorded in terms of the tariff reductions and submission of tariffs and of goods and services to the Secretariat. But then, because things were not moving, they decided that they will pilot a trading arrangement which is known as the guided trade. And then 8 countries are involved, including Ghana, Egypt, Kenya, Mauritius, and others who are trying to speed up. But some of us are very impatient and would want to see the implementation quickly so that I can see Ghanaian chocolates in Addis and I can also drink my coffee, Ethiopian coffee in Ghana, because at the moment it doesn't exist. I can only drink Ethiopian coffee in the US. Next slide, please. Next slide. So let's go quickly. Okay, so what are the threats? And this is where I'm going to be controversial. The EPAs, the Economic Partnership Agreements between the EU and the ACP countries and Africa. It's a challenge for me, and it's a challenge for most of us, because what it seeks to do might undermine the CFTA, and Bakari knows that. He's looking at me. He knows that what I'm talking about. But I'm worried that Cote d'Ivoire and my country, Ghana, have initialed. I don't know if they've signed completely. If they've signed, then we're in trouble. History, we have a problem. Because the question is that what it does is that if you study the agreement, it partitions Africa in a different configuration, which is different from what we have in terms of our integration agenda. It is different, like ECOWAS fits, but then you have East and Southern. Some countries are in, some countries are out. We are not clear. So my beef with this is that if EU wants to have an agreement with Africa, why don't you just give us one agreement between Africa and EU? Don't partition us, don't divide us like you did in 1844, right? We want to be free. So please, I'm appealing to all Africans, including my country, if President Akufo-Addo, if you are watching, please withdraw your signature, please. I'm begging you. I did beg you. Okay. Now, the other thing which I also find, oh, by the way, in terms of the other problem also in terms of the trading arrangements, this kind of bilateral arrangements between Kenya and the US and the northern countries and some of the European countries, I am concerned about that, because that also undermines our integration agenda. It undermines the AFCFTA. And so let's be careful about that. Now, how can you have an African Union when you don't want to pay for it? I mean, how? How can that be? That the programs of the African Union are funded by partners. So how can you be independent and make independent decisions? That's why we came together in 2005. We came up with what is known as the Johannesburg targets, where we said that for programs, for operations, all the member states will fund. And these operations are basically paying for the staff, making sure that the plumbing works, making sure that the trees are manicured or whatever. So that's how, and they are still paying the 100%. And then we said for programs, we'll go, member states at least should contribute 75% of the programs. And for peace and security, because we don't cause most of the problems, we say that the target for member states should be 25%. Unfortunately, between 2015 to 2021, international partners' contribution to the AU on programs is between 60 and 80%. It can't work. It can't work. So I'm appealing that we look into it, and through the way we wanted to address the issue, that in Kigali, again with ECA and others, we came up with a novel idea of a 0.2% on imports that are coming into the countries as a way of collecting revenues for the African Union Commission. And that's what we did. Unfortunately, countries are not in agreement with that. And we have challenges of implementation, we have challenges in terms of countries paying. So if we do not adequately resource the African Union Commission, I sound like I'm working for them, I don't think we'll make a headway. We'll make a headway. Next slide, please. There are others, but let me just go on now. So what are my recommendations as we move forward? My recommendation is, one, is that we should speed up the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, I have a proposal. My proposal is, we all know that countries belong to other regional economic communities, right? You have ECOWAS, you have EAC, you have that. All these countries are what? At least they have an FTA. We know that. They have a free trade area, right? So why can't we just say that state parties of the CFTA, those who have ratified the CFTA, and also belong to an FTA, why is it that we cannot say that when they do their trade, we don't put a stamp of the AFCFTA on it? So what it means is that, when you do a CFTA, there has to be a schedule of when you are going to reduce your tariffs over time. So what we could do is, if Wamkele is watching, you go and sit down with the heads of the RECs and say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to harmonize the tariff reductions so that they are consistent with each other. So therefore, overnight, the 47 countries will be traded. Coffee would be flowing freely in Africa, in many parts of Africa. Macadamia nuts would be going everywhere from Malawi. Mozambique tobacco would go far, although it's bad for your health. But overnight we'll be able to solve our problems, in the sense of our trade. And so one thing I think we have to do is to try and use the regional economic communities to do that. I know Mark Pearson is here, my good friend, who did a lot of work on the tripartite. The tripartite has the tripartite, which is the EAC, COMESA, and SADC. We can easily get them to have a harmonized tariffs and use them as a basis. But everything, as I was told, depends on the member states of where they want to go. The second thing I think we can do in terms of deepening integration let's embrace artificial intelligence. There are challenges with artificial intelligence, but let's embrace it and use it effectively for our development and use it effectively in terms of our integration paradigm. This is something I would like to think more. I don't know much about. I want to think more about it when I am I'm out of this place, and to find a way that we could write and look at how that can help us in terms of advancing our integration. Because one of the things that holds us back, we don't want to do, is when you talk about free movement of persons, there are security checks and all that. AI can help us weed out those who have challenges with security, so that when I show up at their border, they'll know that Joe is a criminal and don't let him in. The third thing I want to propose also is that if there's anything we've learned from COVID, it's something to do the need for us to add value to our products. And so I have a model. A lot of you enjoy the A380 Airbus, right? And I'm proposing that we have a kind of Airbus model of production. Airbus is France. Space, it has a plant in Toulouse, France. But the parts that makes the plane comes from different capitals, different places, not capitals, different countries. And they are all sent to Toulouse, and they just put it together. So what I'm saying is, based on comparative advantage, if cocoa, for example, is in my country, and Cote d'Ivoire, and other countries, so we have a cocoa chocolate factory in either Ivory Coast, sorry, Cote d'Ivoire. You m'excuse, s'il vous plaît. In Cote d'Ivoire, right? We can have the plant in Cote d'Ivoire, which is the three countries. What does it take to manufacture chocolate? We need sugar. Mauritius has sugar, right? We need milk. Botswana, Uganda, they may have milk. So if we begin to, this is just an example. Or let's take, for instance, the lithium, which we are working on now with DRC. right? The lithium, the next stage, I don't know why they stopped at just the production before the battery. We need the battery. John, look. So let's say that Angola decides that it will site the plant. So the battery goes there from DRC to Angola. We are aiming at building the cars ourselves, right? We have the technology. So we have the cars there. There may be other parts that we can come from other places. So if we think about this in terms of our integration, in terms of production, based on comparative advantages, we can bring things from different countries to build this regional value chain. And I think it's important that we look into it to do that. Next slide, please. And the third thing which I think I want to talk about is, again, from what we've learned from COVID, is that the supply chain, everybody says supply chain, that's why inflation is up, because we're depending on the goods to come from China. And China had a zero COVID policy. And as a result of that, things were not moving. We couldn't get chips, we couldn't get this, so prices began to rise. So could we think about it? And again, here's again, I'm just putting out there, we need to explore a little bit, because without good value chain, your supply chain would have problems in terms of getting the AFCFTA completely implemented. So we have to think about that. And it will require us, it's a holistic approach, technology, AI, infrastructure, all that, customs and all that would have to come together to build this kind of supply chain. And I think here again is something we could look at. This is my controversial point, the next one. In my humble opinion, for the leaders that probably, I don't do well around leaders, but for you, those of you like you, Said and Madam, who talk to the leaders, please tell them, abolish visas for Africans to travel freely on the continent. Abolish it. I cannot see why we complain that we talk about Berlin 1844, about where boundaries being drawn, but yet Africans cannot travel freely on the continent. Why is that? Why are we afraid of ourselves? Why are we afraid of ourselves? And I think we have to look into it. They will say that, well, we've done well in terms of visa restrictions, where you can get visa on arrival. But it's not enough. Visa on arrival is not enough. And it's not even cheap. For crying out loud, visa on arrival is not cheap. But we are priding ourselves that is done. But why can't we let people roam freely, Africans? And I don't have to have a reason. If I want to stay in Ethiopia, why should I have a reason for staying in Ethiopia? Why? The only reason is that I'm an African. And so if an Ethiopian wants to go and live in Ghana, it should be free. If I want to be in Cairo, madam, let it be free, right? Why are we being restricted? And I think there's a link in terms of connection between free movement of persons and the economy, because you would be able to get skilled labor moving to where the returns are. So let's look into that. And I think the AU should revisit its position in terms of AU passports. And they can take a cue from the regs like ECOWAS, where you have the AU passport with AU on top and then Ghana beneath. The day I'll get it, I'll be so happy. I'll get one of this. I've been trying hard to get an AU passport, but I can't. Anyway. And the next thing that I think is also important for us to do is the need for us to ratify the protocol on free movements. I mean, the free movement protocol was introduced the same day in Kigali with the AFCFTA. Countries signed, but the impetus was moved to the AFCFTA, and the AFCFTA was ratified in record time. We need a champion for the AFCFTA. One time, I think in a meeting in Ghana, they said Akufo-Addo should be the champion for the free. He can be the champion. He's my uncle, so he can be the champion. But the question is, if my uncle wants to be the champion, he must ratify the protocol in Ghana. It's not right that Ghana is not ratified. Ghana has to ratify it if it wants to have him as a champion. Next slide, please. Can I go back to Ghana? So the other thing I've talked about, I think there's the need for us to strengthen the AU in terms of the financing. We should invest more in infrastructure. And again, another controversial thing I want to say, we need one common currency. We need one common currency. A lot of people don't agree with that, but I think in terms of volatility, the exchange rate, you carry US dollars, you go to another country, you have to change it into the local currency. When you are leaving, you cannot, if you have excess, you are in trouble, because when you go, you can't even return it back into the US currency so that you can come here. And the challenge is that most of our African countries are, I think all, if not, I don't know, are not convertible. You cannot take birr anywhere. You cannot take Ghana cedi anywhere. You cannot take Nigeria naira anywhere. So I think before we should work hard.
West Africa, you can.
Oh, come on. But you know, one thing though, I believe that you'll be surprised that I say, I tell all my Nigerian friends that you're not pushing hard. Because what we need, instead of spending so much resources on the next currency, we can adopt the naira as a common currency for West Africa. That's my opinion. We can change the name though, to appease some people. But I think that's what we should do. That's what we should do. And that would be, and I would say that we could even borrow from the BLS, which has their currencies linked to the rand, right? We can decide which are the 5 powerful economies in this country. We have the rand, we have the Egyptians, we have the Algerians, we have the Moroccans, and the Nigerians. They should come together. In fact, they should do more for us. These powerful people who own the economies, they should do more for the continent. They should lead, put their resources against. That's why I miss Gaddafi. I miss Gaddafi because Gaddafi put a lot of resources behind the AU, right? But anyway, next slide, please. So let's do the common currency. It's important. And the last thing is that I think the private sector should be involved in terms of our integration agenda. And you know, the key question here is that the private sector, I always also think that the integration agenda belongs to them. They stand to gain more than anyone else. So they themselves should not wait for the ECAs, the AUs to bring them on board. They should be lobbying in order to advance the integration agenda. And the last that I want to make a plea to, and here let me borrow from King Idris of Libya when he was here in 1963. He said, and I quote, "Africa south of the Sahara is not a definition aimed at supporting Africa from separating Africa from the north. The Sahara must be seen as a bridge that brings together the two sides." So I'm appealing to partners, please, please, for heaven's sake, stop partitioning us as Sub-Saharan Africa and MENA. Call us one. We need just one Africa. And I think I'm hoping that one day in the AU, there'll be a decision that is taken to tell international partners, stop calling us Sub-Saharan Africa. There's no Sub-Saharan Africa and there's no North Africa. We are just one Africa. We are all one Africa. We might have diversity, but we are one. And so we should stop this idea of Sub-Saharan, and I agree very much with King Idris. Ethiopia, next slide. I want to stop by appealing to you with this poem, which was read by Kwame Nkrumah in May 25th in 1963, not far from here, because of the fact that Ethiopia inspired us greatly, inspired all of us to gain our independence. And let me, with your permission, I'll read. Ethiopia shall rise. Ethiopia, Africa's bright gem, set high among the vented hills that gave birth to the unfailing waters of the Nile. Ethiopia shall rise. Ethiopia, land of the wise. Ethiopia, bold, cradle of Africa's ancient rule and fertile school of our African culture. Ethiopia, the wise, shall rise and remold us to the full figure of Africa's hopes and destiny. Kwame Nkrumah. Next slide. Yes, I'm done. Next slide. One more slide, and then I'm done. The last one. So, to borrow from my hero, Ben Bella of Algeria, let us all agree to die a little or even completely so that African unity may not just be a vain word. Africa must unite to achieve the Africa we want. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joe, for a very passionate and Pan-African presentation. Unfortunately, you've not really answered your problematic. You set out by asking the question, is Africa integrating or disintegrating?
I gave it to you, but you didn't see it.
We don't know whether
it was there.
What your actual response was in your presentation.
It was there, but you didn't see it. You can find it.
I'll take away two things from what you've said. And I'll leave the rest to the discussants and also to the Deputy Executive Secretary, Atta-Mensah, to speak to. One is about the issue of free movement on the continent, the removal of visa. I think it's important that for us to know that we cannot have free trade without having free citizens. It's very fundamental. And I think that's something we need to work more on. Whatever may be the fears and anxieties of our political leaders, we need to address that. And we need to address that both at the level of analysis and policy recommendations to our leaders. We cannot have free trade without free citizens. And if Africans don't dignify themselves, nobody will dignify them. If this continent doesn't dignify itself in terms of opening up its borders, nobody else will do that. It's easier for non-Africans to come into this continent than for Africans to move around. So where lies the African dignity? Where lies the African personality? I think as a knowledge policy institution, this is something we need to interrogate at the level of analysis and make policy recommendations. One thing that Joe did not mention is also ECA's role in the process of democratization on this continent. In 1990, ECA gathered African leaders in Arusha, Tanzania, to have a deliberation of popular participation in development in Africa. And a major theme of that conference in Arusha was on democratization. It was on democratization. It was a conference co-organized with the African Union. And they came up with a charter, the African Charter on Popular Participation for Development in Africa. This was a major trigger for democratization and opening up the space for civil society organizations to campaign for democracy on this continent. Many people may not know that. That's not only in the economic plane, but it's also in the political plane. ECA has been on the fore, the very fore, in fighting for good governance, democratization on this continent. And for the current debate we're having in ECA as to how to go, I think that may inform it in terms of where we're coming from and where we probably may be looking at, because we've been having this intensive discussion in ECA as to what should be our boundaries, what should be our limit in terms of interrogation. That boundaries were never there in terms of the work that historically had been done in this institution. And I think we need to take that on board. I'll call on Stephen and Ayo. Please hold on a little bit. I'll give the acting executive secretary, Ms. Atta-Mensah, 5 minutes. And when after 5 minutes, I'll stop her. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Many thanks, Joe, for a brilliant presentation. Really was thought-provoking, as expected, and very nicely rooted in history, which is very important. And I think I really loved your connection between the role of ECA historically and how we were behind the creation of many of actually the African institutions that we have today. So let me start. I'd like to comment on your presentation, but I'll start with what I completely agree with you and I feel very strongly about, which is the last one. We should never have like a sub-Saharan Africa. It's all Africa. And to me, it's a way of dividing the continent. So for me, nothing really annoys me more than when I read reports where they're talking about sub-Saharan Africa rather than the statistics for Africa. So completely agree with you. And there are so many complementarities and issues that, if we're thinking with the whole continent, there are so many things that we can do more, and we can, bridge the gaps and, enhance investments across the continents, because some of actually the parts that are kind of, don't tend to be sub-Saharan are actually the ones that have been the most active in investments within Africa. So if you exclude it, you're saying that Africans don't invest in Africa. And to me, that's an issue. But I'd like to just maybe go through things that, of course, I agree in terms of the direction, in terms of the need for us to deepen regional integration and the implementation. And I think now is like the most opportune time for us to do so, not only because we have the African Free Continental Trade Agreement, but also because of what's happening in the world. It's like a window of opportunity with all the disruptions in the global supply chains. That means that there are opportunities that open up now that would not have been possible before. There is this, trend from, less focus on the cost and efficiency to more focus on proximity and trust. And, for us to be, in our location and close to so many other markets, it gives us this advantage to break through in global value chains that would not have been possible before. Some of the things that I think we really need to do, though, to get there, and I'm surprised you did not touch on, is issues of transport, cost of transport, for God's sake, and how we need to actually go through Europe to go to Africa. And this has to be tackled if we ever have a chance to actually advance on the integration. Of course, there are so many things that can be done, including whether starting from open sky to issues of single air market, African single air market. All these are really the tools, but we need to be determined that this is the way we want to go, because without reducing the cost of shipping and transport within the continent, we don't have a chance to benefit from the potential that this integration could offer. And I think, you brought an interesting point about how can we use technology. So I think in general, the two areas that we need to work on, in my humble opinion, one is the issue of the transport and reducing cost. Second is definitely the movement of people. We cannot integrate without being able to travel freely within the continent. So really opening it and not requiring visas, and actually even having a more integrated labor market, because we have the highest movement or migration is not outside of Africa, it's within Africa. So how can we actually harness this by making it legal and providing the framework? And third, which I thought you would have said something about, is cross-border payment systems.
Yeah, I had it on the slide.
Okay, good. So we're in agreement, because this is the thing. Like, if you think about trade between Egypt and Kenya, if there are imports between the two, there is no reason that traders have to deal in third currency in US dollars. And if there is any FX shortages, they cannot trade. That doesn't make any sense. We should be able to actually overcome that through a payment system. And I like the point that you made about using technology for regional integration, because this is the issue about the movement of goods and people. So how can you use it to actually make it faster? We have to also be careful, of course, about the, are we in control of what we're using? But I think it's a very good point, because we need to streamline. And some of the other things that I really thought we could do more in, and I agree with you, like the issues of regional infrastructure, both energy and infrastructure and logistics, I think is the area that we need to find the resources to invest in to enable this integration. And we had Robert, and the team did great work on that area. Of course, I couldn't agree more with you about the financing of the African Union. If we're not vested in our own institution, it's hard to really advance the agenda in it. So we need to really pay attention more to that. The one that we have different views about, is the common currency. And here is why, because I think it can be the direction of travel, but to actually have it, it means that we need to have very flexible fiscal policy. And we're not there, because that would be your only policy tool. And this is the issue. We're far from it. So until we get there, that will be very challenging. And then on private sector, my own view is that private sector have led the way before governments. Even before the African Continental Free Trade Agreement existed, private sector was the most active in terms of investment and expansion in the continent in many sectors, whether it's financial sector, insurance, energy, infrastructure. So what we need to do is enable them to continue that lead and that role. And we need to make sure that these incentives are aligned in the way that the framework is designed, and then to have the investment framework to enable, once you invest in one country, it makes it easier for you to invest in the rest of the continent. So these are really the few thoughts I'd like to share, but very much appreciate your wisdom and thoughts that you've shared with us. Thank you so much. We'll miss you.
I was about to stop Madam Deputy, looking her in the face, and she got the point. So thank you very much, Ms. Anan-Mosi, for your intervention. I would like to invite the UNDP resident representative. Stephen, I'm not going to call you immediately. Let me call Ayo. To invite the UNDP resident representative and also the director of the financial op of the UNDP. Ayo, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very much, Program Director, and a big congratulations to my dear friend and brother, Joe. We have listened to you, and it really shows that in spite of reaching the retirement level, you are still extremely intellectually sound and practically bubbly. So that's really, really great. I think I would just want to start from where Said mentioned earlier on, the thesis of the presentation. You have touched on a number of issues which I think are really critical for us to really promote integration on the continent. And if I get you very correctly, Africa is integrating, but at a very slow pace. That's the message that I got from there. And I think you are aptly right in so many areas. Most of the issues you have raised. And I won't really belabor that, but I will just emphasize some of the critical things which I think is really we need. Again, amplifying some of the issues you've raised. You have mentioned one thing which is really very critical, that one of the reasons why we are not really integrating as fast as we envisaged is that we have ambitious goals with very limited resources and capacity. And I think that's one of the areas we have to really invest in for us to really accelerate full integration. And I can but fully agree with you that the role of external partnership has really whittled the pace at which Africa is integrating. But you have mentioned quite a number of them. And I just want to use this one as a clarion call that African countries must review all trade and investment agreements and revisit all agreements that contradict the goal of African integration and African Agenda 2063. In fact, there's hardly any country that is left behind on this. You realize that most of the bilateral agreements we've had, they give preference to those outside the continent than African countries. So if countries that are outside the continent have better access in terms of trade with an African country compared to other African countries, and I think it's really a major challenge. We need to really revisit this because it does not really augur well for us to effectively integrate at the pace at which Joe really wanted. So that's one thing which I think it's really very important for us to really look at. And on the basis of this, I would just want to really re-echo some of the issues, particularly when it comes to the issue of he who pays the piper dictate the tune. African Union must be fully funded for us to really achieve the kind of integration we are all looking for. Otherwise, if somebody is funding it, they will dictate the direction and how you're going to use it. And that is it. It's very simple. So I strongly believe we need to really wake up when it comes to the issue of this. The Johannesburg Declaration about funding mechanism for the African Union need to be fully entrenched. And this is one thing I consider to be very, very important. And I just want to really, really be a bit controversial here. African Union has really achieved a lot, particularly when it comes to the issue of rolling out declarations, which is on the basis of an average of 25 every year. But I think we need to invest heavily and pay more attention to the implementation of all agreed protocols rather than rolling in new ones. So I want to say, well, one of the critical roles of the African Union is how do we really push for those protocols we've had on integration, and particularly on the one on AFCFTA. So we need to really make sure this thing really works. Otherwise, we will just be regurgitating the same things that have really impeded our progress and the level of integration. So this is something that I see that is really very important. And in this regard, I fully agree with Joe on regional developmentalism, where we need to really adopt the Airbus production model, where, well, we have what they call copper, one of the best in the world in DRC. If South Africa has the finance to do that, why don't we just have a kind of agreement where multiple countries can be involved in the production process and then make sure we get it done? The location has to be one place, but we have to use it to generate the job that is needed on the continent and promote regional integration. And on this note, I want to really say, for us to really ensure integration really works, particularly the use of CFTA, we have to really address what we currently face, which we call the psychological war. In Africa, we consume what we don't produce, what our neighbors don't produce. We produce what our neighbors don't consume, and we consume what we don't even produce. Most elite in Africa, even in rural areas, it's not only elite. Everybody is, to say, oh, the clothes I'm wearing come from Europe, come from North America, come from Asia. None is really fully proud to say this one comes from one of my neighboring countries. And I think that psychological warfare, we need to deal with it. We need to ensure that we promote this Pan-African initiative on regional integration is fully integrated. We must promote made in Africa goods. This is really very important. And also, we have experienced a situation whereby we need to wake up what we call the idle capitals in Africa for regional integration. We have, as of 2020, about 1.1 trillion African capitals that are invested outside the continent. Most of which are invested outside the continent, including the foreign reserves of our central banks, the pension funds, the reserves of our unused commercial bank reserves, the sovereign wealth fund, and insurance fund. It's about 1.1 trillion. And I think most of them are invested outside. How can we make sure we use this one to promote the regional developmentalism that will shift the frontier of regional integration? And I strongly believe this is really very important for us to see how best we can really achieve this. And also, we have to respect ourselves. If we don't respect ourselves, nobody respects us. In this regard, I think the illicit financial flows, which UNCTAD estimated about an average of 86 billion every year, I think we need to really put an end to this. This is something that is really very important. We need to really make sure those resources are invested in Africa, not in terms of stolen funds, but we use it to create and regenerate the kind of job that we need for our youth as the most youthful continent in the world. So this is what I think is really very important for us. And finally, Mr. Moderator and the program director, this is a message to our leaders. I think we need to really promote the use of Troika representation of Africa in some of these strategic engagement and meetings with the rest of the world. For a country to really request for a meeting for 55 heads of state and government, I think that it's difficult to have a meaningful discussion around that. I think the use of Troika in the representation of the development meetings with Africa needs to be well entrenched. This is what will help to really position Africa as a respected continent. And in this regard, it will help us to really shape the frontier of regional integration, which we are all preaching. So let me just stop here because of time constraints. And I'm sure Stephen is yearning to really come with his intervention on this issue. Over to you, Program Director.
Thank you, Ayo. Those were very insightful in terms of your intervention. I'll take on your last point, which is about the Troika. African countries, 54 African countries, not railing themselves into a single meeting. You imagine the continent of 1.3 billion people going to have a meeting in a country with a country of 5 billion people. How do you understand that? And I think the AU is alive to that. A decision has been made to that effect, to limit number of African countries who will be going. Whether that decision will be respected is a different thing entirely. But the decision has been made by the African Union that you don't have a situation in which 54, 53 African leaders get on the bus to go and visit another country of 5 million people. I think there's a lot to say about that. Stephen, I hope you're ready.
Yes,
Stephen,
I am.
you have the
yes,
floor.
I am. Safe. No, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me first of all say hello to all the friends, those we have worked with, those who have worked with Joe now in the past, and including those who have been inspired to want to continue work, to want to work with him even as he goes to the next phase of his career journey and also life journey. I would want to appreciate Joe, first of all, for your deep belief in the regional integration. I think from the talk that you've given us, the passion has actually come through, and your commitment and belief to regional integration as a way to realize the dream and the vision of the forefathers of our continent and the foremothers of our continent. I think there is no doubt all of us know it, and we see the kind of belief that you have. I would also want to appreciate you, Joe, for being unapologetic to the views that you hold on regional integration. You have been fearless, and at times you have come out as a lone voice on some of the issues. The rest of us have had some catching up to do on some of the aspirations that actually you have articulated along the way, things that you have said, and some of the debates that continue, even the kind of debate that you're having with Hanan, this movement about the common currency. This is something that you have pursued and you have mentioned many times. Of course, there are empirical issues with what you have said, and I think as I'll come back to conclude, maybe there are a few questions that we still need to answer based on some of the recommendations that you have given. I wanted to say that the visa issue, for instance, for Africans, sometimes we would be in meetings where you would have delegations, both from all the African countries, including our host country of ECA, Ethiopia, and you would not shy away to ask, why is it that Africans needed visas to come to Ethiopia? I recall many times during those committee sessions on regional integration, you asking the ministers from Ethiopia, why do Africans need visas to come to Ethiopia? I have to say that today, most of the Africans, when we come to Ethiopia, we are able to get the visas upon arrival. It was never like that before. So if there's something that probably you have contributed to, it's actually this fearlessness of actually being able to ask this difficult question, even to the policy leaders, even within the host country that we operate from. Now, I have already said that you have always been ahead. And for me, because I've worked with you from day one, I can say that regional integration in Africa has benefited from you intellectually, through advocacy, and also through operational. I think the testimonials that have been given here, including by those who have held very high-ranking positions within the continent, bears witness to what I'm saying, that you have given us intellectual leadership on a good number of issues. You have been an advocate for regional integration, and you have even been on the ground on making things happen. Now, on the theme of this seminar, I would like to say that you have allowed us to trace the history of integration in Africa, which was great. I know there are people here who did not know that history. You have also demonstrated what we have always argued as at ECA, that there are very many dimensions of regional integration. If you read through the paper that Joe has given us, and which, as he has said, he's going to continue to develop, one can see that Joe indirectly challenges those who seem to equate Africa's integration process to that of Europe. If anything, Africa's integration has had and continues to have important dimensions, including peace and security, even before we think of market integration, which seems to be to be gaining a lot of focus today. What this means then, Joe, and speaker and listeners, is that the answer to the question that Joe has raised, whether we are integrating or disintegrating, needs to be addressed with these many dimensions in mind. The integration index that the chief executives of ECA, ADB, and AUC spearheaded captured some of these dimensions in one objective function. And that is why today, as someone who sits in a seat that you used to occupy, Joe, I'm a bit sad that we have not been able to produce a new issue, or at least a new edition of the Regional Integration Index. And whatever is causing us not to be able to produce that index are basically some of the themes that you are coming to, Joe, saying that we need to move beyond. We need to move beyond competition between institutions and have this bigger picture. Because if we are going to be able to answer the question whether Africa is integrating or disintegrating, we need to be able to measure it, and you need to have a very strong theoretical and intellectual foundation to be able to answer that question. Let me conclude. Because I know we do not have a lot of time, by putting on the table one of the important ways also of answering the question that Joe's paper raises, beyond the measurement of whether we are integrating or not. I think I remember when Hakim was the director of the division, which both Joe and I had the privilege to serve as successors, we tried to answer the question why regional integration does not lead to income convergence in Africa. Because at the end of the day, regional integration is about people. And I think that's why I like the philosophy in ECOWAS, whereby they talk about ECOWAS of the people. We need to be able to see more money in people's pockets. So we tried to ask the question, do we observe income convergence whereby the LDCs and the small island developing countries are converged to the bigger economies like South Africa or Egypt because of the integration process? I would want to argue that it's only when we are able to demonstrate that incomes are converging across the 55 AU member states that we can also be able to answer concretely that we are integrating and not disintegrating. Now, when we did this work, we did not actually get an affirmation that regional integration was leading to income convergence. We did this work about more than 10 years ago. But I would want to argue that it is possible that one can influence the time horizon, or rather the speed, and also the point at which this income convergence occurs, and some of the things that you have highlighted, Joe, of what has been happening in terms of the various dimensions of regional integration. I want to believe that if we were to revisit this work, that we are likely to affirmatively say that actually regional integration is leading to income convergence, which then brings me to my final point that the recommendations that you make are quite bold. We already have probably some things to build on to interrogate each of those recommendations. I want to believe that if we're able to capture the progress that has been on the basis of each of those recommendations, we can actually be able to not only answer concretely whether we are integrating or disintegrating, but also whether regional integration is actually leading to income convergence. So let me thank you for the contribution that you have made to the speed and the pace of integration in Africa. And let me also thank you for being a great colleague, a compassionate colleague. And from the testimonials that we have had today, many of you will know that Joe has also been a refuge to many staff when they have gone through the kind of challenges that His Excellency Mwecha was talking about. And they can know that if ever you wanted to go and talk to somebody about even your professional life, Joe always had that hearing here. So thank you, Joe, also for being a friend to many of us and to myself. And we are happy to have been your colleague, and we are happy to continue working with you, even as you to the next phase of your life journey. Thank you. Back to you, Said.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I think we cannot close the seminar without affording the opportunity to colleagues who are here and online, the participants, to ask questions, raise issues, make comments, but please be very brief. So if you want to intervene, please, you can raise up your hand. We'd like to take a few before we give the vote of thanks. Yes, please. You have the floor.
I beg your pardon. Just to agree.
Can you kindly identify yourself first?
Yes, my name is Stephen Berg, United Nations Office to the African Union. And a sort of, I don't want to appear to be dividing a continental ethos, but I have a question about convincing Africans to pay for Africa. And what is the obstacle? But this also applies in terms of internal tax revenue, Africans paying tax. So as you integrate, you lower tariffs and duties, which are mainstays of member state revenue, or you move in the direction of common currencies and you face the challenges that the deputy highlighted, limiting fiscal space for policy, but also monetary policy, limiting the amount that African member states can borrow. If you're going to embark on these policies without having addressed how member states raise internal tax revenue, or indeed citizens of member states pay for their states, I mean, how much tax is paid in Ethiopia? How much tax is paid in Zimbabwe? Why do Africans, as the UNDP colleague pointed out, continually invest their revenues elsewhere without contributing these resource streams to this extremely important project? So I wonder if we're putting the cart before the horse, because if we implement some of these policies without addressing that issue in advance, member states will lose revenues. That's a question to Joe.
Thank you. Any other participant who would like to take the floor? Yes, I can see. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Mark Pearson. I've been working with Joe for many years. I work as a consultant. I just wanted to comment on some of the issues that Joe raised, and I think that he's being a little unfair to himself in saying that we haven't made much progress on many of these things. In particular, things like accelerating the AFCFTA and implementation. I think that the AFCFTA has got some very unique and far-looking parts of components there that actually provide a mechanism for the member states to actually deepen integration. So, for example, when we talk about the ability for member states to, members of COMESA, members of SADC, members of the AAC, etc., to use or to build on their own integration, I think the process of the acquis allows us to do that, and I think that's a very strong process to build on. The Airbus model, I think that's something which uniquely in the AFCFTA we have cumulation, the process of cumulation on rules of origin, which is not part of many of the regional integration models. Strengthening the supply chains. Just look at the annexes, Annex 4, Annex 8 of the AFCFTA. We have a lot of things in there that are really allow us to build on trade facilitation, on customs facilitation. And so I think that the great thing about the work that people like Joe have done over 20 years or more is that we have now arrived at a place where we can do a lot more than what we could do before we started on this journey. So it's a process, but I think the main challenge is that you can take a horse to water, but you cannot make it drink. And I think the issues here are to try and convince the member states to use the instruments that Joe has outlined, so that we can actually deepen the integration. So the question that he asked about, are we integrating or disintegrating? I think the process is we are integrating more, but at times it looks like we're disintegrating, but it's a long process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I was going to call a lady, but being a very close friend of Joe, but I think I'll give you the floor. Joe?
Thank you. Thank you, Joe, for a very thought-provoking presentation. I have two points, two comments. On are we integrating or disintegrating? I think that the process of, like development, which is not linear, integration or disintegration may not necessarily be a linear process, right? Sometimes some factors move you towards integration, and other times they move you away. And in that context, I'd like to say one thing. I think Africa needs more shocks, more external shocks, to really get us really to be serious. Because at the end of the day, it's really about self-interest. And so if the shocks move us to do the things that really force us to integrate. For example, look what has happened with grain production since the Ukraine crisis, right? It shocked some countries into action. Maybe we need more of that. So that's one point. The second point is, when we talk about are we integrating or disintegrating, the question is, how are we even measuring this, right? You can integrate, there's the regional economic communities can engage more, integrate more, right? So you can have intra-rec integration, and then you can have integration across recs. My thinking is that AFCFTA was about both, but more about inter-rec integration than intra-rec integration. So when we talk about are we integrating or disintegrating, what is our measure? How are we talking about more integration within recs or across recs? And do we even have the data to measure that? How are we even measuring that? So I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Pat. I would like to call a lady. Francis, I can see you getting agitated. I'll call you, don't worry. Messi, then we'll come to Francis.
Very quick question. I think as someone who started off with a poem or integrated key sayings from our historical leaders, I was a little bit surprised that you did not look at cultural integration and the fact that culturally, artistically, I think Africa is really way ahead. If you look at Nollywood, if you look at how artists are collaborating across the continent through music, through and the money that is being generated as a result of this kind of integration or collaboration across the continent. And I was wondering what your thoughts about that are. Thank you.
In fact, for the cultural integrators, I think the state is a barrier, and the music industry as well. I think it's thriving so well on the continent, and the state is even a barrier to their flourishing. Francis?
Thanks very much, Said, and Joe, congrats. When Robert first spoke to me about it, trying to have a conversation a seminar for Joe, Joe is a big brother I've known since I got to ECA. He's particularly close. But I asked Robert, but why? Why Joe? I mean, many people have retired. Why are you convening this for Joe? I think the question has been soundly answered when I listened to the testimonies and the crop of people who created time to attend this seminar to speak and speak so glowingly about you. And I don't think there was any pretense. It was factual, and that is really highly appreciated. I have continued to engage you sitting where I am as the Chief of Regional Integration, and I continue to appreciate your support, be it in the work I'm doing in area and other aspects of integrating the continent. You've always been an asset, and I don't doubt that you give me the liberty to continue to disturb you even in your retirement. You raised a lot of issues. The one thing I would want to touch on is the issue of political will, which you raised and which has been a cliche. We keep talking about the lack of political will on the continent, but there is some disconnect between the high appetite when it comes to the political will to establish initiatives and get agreements and the disjuncture that exists between adopting these initiatives and their implementation. So Joe, I don't know whether you've reflected on why there is this gap between why is it that there's so high political will in crafting initiatives, but so low when it comes to implementation? And also in your analysis of the history, unpacking the history, you missed out on linking the moments of Africa's history with important leadership. Because if you go through the history of integration, the key initiative or milestones have been backed by important leaders on the continent. I know you talked about Nkrumah, but even if you come to the era of NEPA, you had the Obasanjo, Bouteflika, and Wade leadership, and you come to the AU itself, you have late President Gaddafi. So what is the place of leadership in Africa's integration journey? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis. I think that's a very important point, the role of leadership. I will go online to invite colleagues who are online. I would like to call Joy from UNDP. Joy Katagewa. Joy, you have the floor, please.
Yes, good morning. Good morning from New York, and thank you very much for the opportunity to share some reflections about Joe. Is Africa integrating, not integrating? I'm definitely on the side of integration. I think we've seen important progress with the AFCFTA, and there's also interesting thought going on about what next, not least in the promise of ARIA that's forthcoming and other processes as well. But today I'd like to celebrate Joe Atta Mensah. Joe is one of my most trusted and cherished mentors. Joe guides, he advises, he calls me out, and is always a cheerleader. Joe speaks great destinies into the lives of many people, including myself. Joe and I have achieved so many professional milestones together, not only from the AFCFTA, but also recently with the Africa Prosperity Dialogue. So I will conclude by saying, Joe, thank you very much for your leadership. Thank you for your humility. Thank you for your support. Godspeed, Joe. Thank you.
Very much, Joy. Femi Omire is online. Femi,
hi.
Can you take the floor, please?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yeah, hi.
Please
Hi,
go
so-
ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, many congratulations. It's wonderful to be in this arena just to hear, all the wonderful thoughts about Joe in particular, but, what he stands and represents. I'm in Tanzania at the moment. And what I say, can you hear me? Sorry. Is it still audible? Yes, what I wanted to ask about is really the idea about the decolonization efforts that are ongoing. And one of the and I speak more from the, not to say my age, but that kind of youthful energy that I work around regarding data and regarding, I know AI was mentioned earlier in the talk. One of the things that's quite concerning is the degree to which all our efforts, and I say that, in quite definite terms, most, if not all our efforts regarding technology happens on Western-oriented platforms. This very call, the Twitters we use, the Facebooks we use, the LinkedIns, and so on. And so that obviously feeds into the abilities of such corporations and how they bolster other nation states, if you like, their abilities to do stuff. Now, we need, in my respectful kind of point here, to equally be in that game. It's vitally, vitally important. That is the new gold, that is the new oil, whatever point we wish to put on it. So I can't get that point across more. And I just wanted to know from a group of obviously matured professionals, probably not in that generational kind of space of knowing how, or I say using it to the extent that the youth will be using it and are using it. But what are we really going to do, and how are we going to invest in that new age technology that is going to be, and already is, a kernel of how we will develop and how we will regenerate, I think is a better term, how we will regenerate. What's our investment, our real investment, to understand this technology and to build it ourselves? We need to put our money where our mouth is, and we need to be in the game. At the moment, we're not in the game. It's someone else's game. It's someone else's algorithm. Where is Africa's?
Thank you very much, Femi. We need to play our game. I think that's quite important. I would like to call two colleagues, one retired, who worked with us for several years here and just retired. I would like to call Aida Opoku-Mensah, and then after that, Dimitri. So Dimitri, get ready. Aida?
Hello, Saeed. Hello, everyone. Hello, Joe. It's great. This is a real great honor to Joe. Congratulations. Everyone who has worked with Joe in ECA knows how passionate he is about regional integration. And also how frustrating it has been with regard to Africa's integration and the speed of it. However, a lot has been achieved. Joe, let me just quickly touch on 2 points. The first point made by the previous speaker, Femi, as you know, I cannot hear those kinds of things and not make a comment. And that is technology, and specifically ICT and the importance of us having the opportunity to network infrastructurally in information and communication technologies. And that will be, in my view, the basis for integration. The second point I also want to raise is that it is extremely difficult, and I would commend people like Dr. K.Y. Amwako, our previous executive secretary, who was very passionate about this issue as well and introduced this area of work. But my question to you, Joe, is that have we missed something? How do we integrate when our economies are skewed towards our colonizers? The Lusophones trade more with Portugal, the Anglophones trade more with Britain, and then increasingly China and Asia and the US. But wouldn't there have been the basis for us to integrate based on a structural transformation of our economies to enable that happen? And that is my question to you, and I'd love to hear your response. But you've been a great brother. It's been wonderful working with you. And as I said to you earlier in a message, it's an end of an era in ECA. But I do hope that you keep the embers burning of regional integration and Africa's integration. Thank you very much. And greetings to all my friends who are there, and warm regards from Accra.
Thank you very much, Aida. Dimitri, please be brief in the interest of time.
Yes, Said, I'll be brief. First point is just to recognize our brother Joe, whom I knew far before even we get to the ECA. He remembers those days. He was at the Central Bank of Canada, was in Statistics Canada, and then we got to meet in ECA to advance the integration of the continent together. Now is leaving, and I hope that I will be following him back on his path. Very quickly, the question that is asked, are we integrating or disintegrating? Let me pick up from the angle of one of our colleagues who just said that culture is very important. Culture is very important not only in terms of contributing to the economy in terms of cultural and creative industries, but most importantly, indigenous knowledge and the whole coming together of African countries to understand that we are moving toward integration is very important. The region that I'm dealing with today, all the progress that we have made, we were talking about ECOWAS as a region that is more or less already integrated, but we can see that for the last couple of years, we are having problems in terms of insecurity, which is bringing us back, actually, in terms of where we were before. So I think there's a need to build on culture as the pillar for us moving toward integration in the future. What are your reflections on that, Joe? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. Lamine, please be brief. Then Mustafa,
Yes,
get ready.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this debate about Joe, my very good friend for the best part of 2 decades.
Lamine, is it possible to see you? Can you put on your camera, please?
I am not too confident about my connection, but I'll try. Okay.
If it doesn't work, then you can do it here.
Can you see me? Hello?
Yes, we can see you. Please go ahead. Yes.
Yes,
we can see you.
I was saying I worked with Joe for the best part of 2 decades when I was at the African Development Bank, and I would have wanted to see more ADB staff here today
testifying. Joe was a great partner. He was not just a partner and a counterpart. He became a very good friend and a brother. And I think he's one of the best intellectuals we had on the continent and in these institutions. To his question, is Africa integrating or disintegrating? I think it is integrating, and he has a huge contribution that he made to that. If we look at what's happening in ECOWAS, this transformation that points towards integration, what we do have in the tripartite with East Africa, in the Eastern and Southern Africa part, EAC, COMESA, SADC coming together to form the tripartite. The RECs were supposed to be building blocks for the African continent. Now we have a wall. It goes to the tripartite. It's not just building blocks. We have a wall already in place. We're hoping that we're working with Joe at one point to have in ECOWAS come together with ECAS and a few others in Central Africa to bring another wall up in this part of the world. It will happen at one point. You look at the OSBPs, the one-stop border posts, which are being created now all over Africa. That's another sign of integration, which was assisted to a great extent by Trademark South Africa and Trademark East Africa, etc. They did a great piece of work there. So we have all of these things coming up. Of course, you have the AFCFTA now, which is coming up, which is also another sign of integration, and we need to celebrate all of those. And Joe did have a great contribution to all of these initiatives. And I would just want to touch on quickly on ARIA. We at the African Development Bank have done the regional integration strategy for Africa, and we brought in all the institutions, ECA, AUC, the RECs, etc., NEPAD, for validation of that strategy. Joe was there. He was very active. And all of those, whilst we're doing that, we try to do what was called status of integration in Africa. Joe told us about ARIA. So why are you doing status of integration in Africa? We have ARIA. And we came onto ARIA, we did ARIA 3, 4, etc. And ARIA 4 is the foundation stone for AFCFTA. Joe would tell you about that. So we had all of these great initiatives which are coming up in Africa and still are because of people like Joe. These sort of initiatives and strategies need champions, need people who are passionate about integration and those strategies to champion them. And Joe was one of those. He was unapologetic. He was fearless. He would raise issues which made some people, pretty uncomfortable, but they needed to be raised for us to think outside the box. And he's still doing so today. So I think that's a very good sign. And I just want to say, all the things we did together. Joe, thank you very much for being there. At the ADB also, he was very well known. He was very appreciated, not just in Addis. We worked with him, all of those things, Mo Ibrahim Foundation things, on the integration program, on CODA, Joint Secretariat, which he wrote the concept note for the Joint Secretariat, which I eventually used to develop the board memo at the ADB and created the Joint Secretariat Support Office in Addis. Joe was behind all of those initiatives. So, I think we cannot say enough because we don't have enough time. But Joe, thank you very much for having been there and still being there. You are a great colleague, a great friend, a great brother. And we hope that you will be around for many more of these initiatives. I couldn't let go of this opportunity without saying anything on behalf of the African Development Bank, even though I've retired now. I think it did a lot to bring the three institutions closer, ADB, ECA, and AU. Thank you very much for that. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Lamin, for coming, out of retirement to be part of this conversation. Mustafa and then Adeline. Mustafa, please be very brief.
Thank you. I will be very brief as usual. Can you hear me, Said? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fantastic. No, thank you very much. Good afternoon, yes, Hanan, Joe, colleagues. I will be very brief, but I'm calling from Geneva. So congratulations, my dear brother Joe, for all your achievements, commitment, the passion, and the empathy you have shown during your inspiring term with ECA. I think from ARIA to FCFTA, your legacy is massive, impressive, and inspirational. On macro, on trade, on finance, Joe, you have provided an inclusive perspective of regional integration, and the lecture you provided just now is a great illustration. You have this holistic approach that makes your contribution rather unique, and more importantly, you have been a manager who has shown respect to all, and I think this is very important. Joe, it has been a pleasure and honor to accompany you during this period since day one. I remember when we arrived together at ECA at this time. It has been a pleasure really to be a part of this journey with you, and an honor. One question I have for you, Joe, before I give back the floor. How to support real convergence, and what will be the first measure you will implement to ensure real convergence before talking about nominal and common currency? All the best for the next chapter of your life, Joe, and also greeting to all my friends and colleagues in Addis and in other recs of ECA. ECA one day, ECA every day, as we said. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mustafa. The last intervention will be from Adeline. Adeline, you have the floor. Please be brief. We need to close by 6. Please be brief.
Thank you very much. Let me switch on also the video. Thank you. I am talking, let me see. I'm also talking from Vienna, International Atomic Energy Agency. I would like to join also Mustafa to say one day ECA, forever ECA, and just to congratulate and also show some appreciation to Joe, because Joe is one of the colleagues or person who were part of my young career at the beginning, but who has always been there. So I would like to seize this opportunity to really thank you, Joe, and encourage you for, not to stop and continue doing so, mentoring young staff, because I think many people have already reiterated it. You have been very impactful in people's life, not only professional-wise, but also providing advice. And I think when we talk about regional integration, we tend to forget that behind some effort, there are people also pushing forward and moving agendas. So I also see this opportunity to thank and appreciate this initiative by ECA colleagues, because most of the time, we see people being celebrated when they're no longer there. So I'm really, really happy and really I congratulate ECA's colleague for taking this initiative and celebrating it, around such a, important topic, brainstorming together on your legacy and what also we can focus on on different challenges that we will have to look forward to. If I may join also with one comment regarding the presentation, one contribution, I would like just to also I joined some comment mentioning leadership as a very important element of regional integration in Africa, but I also tend to believe that when there is will, most of the time government and senior leaders find a way to implement things. So if we still have some challenges, it's just because the pure the willingness to do things is not really in place. But I also, we also see by experience that we can move things from the top to down, but also from down to top. I'm bringing here on board the role played by young people. Young people, we know they represent almost 75% of the regional population. So mentoring them, you are very good at that. Mentoring them, it's also very important in creating this human capital and workforce we need to really nurture this regional integration. We need to make sure that the younger generation love Africa, that they are proud of the Africa that we want. We see Africans fleeing the continent to go abroad. We need to, let's say, make Africa more attractive to Africans, not only their countries, but others. And while being attractive, it has to be also welcoming. I think it has been already said before. So, Joe, as you are going, as we wish you good fishing, after today. You know, I think a good point that I would like to encourage you to continue focusing on is mentorship. We know in Africa we value our elders, and it would be so sad that all this knowledge that you have gained and that we are learning from you now would just go vanish. Please use it, mentor the way you can. Younger generation, whether at school or wherever, whether a young professional, as you have done also with me. So I wish you well, and thank you everyone.
Thank you very much, Adeline. I would like to recognize Joe's family. They're online, they're in Canada. It's quite early in the morning, but they've taken the pain to join us. I have Mrs. Benedict Atta Mensah, who is the wife, and Meron Atta Mensah, Maya Atta Mensah, and Messi Atta Mensah. Without them, we cannot have Joe. And without them, Joe couldn't have made the contributions he's made. When a man functions well, check his home. Something good is happening there. So thanks to the family of Joe for giving Joe to us, and now you're about to take Joe back. We hope that you'll be able to borrow Joe to us as and when necessary. So thank you very much for making it possible for Joe to play the role he's played on the continent. Joe, I'll give you 2 minutes. 2 minutes to respond.
Sure.
You may choose not to respond.
Sure.
Just say all points taken, the conversation continues. So before I give the floor to Robert to finally close and give the full vote of thanks.
Okay. Messi is saying that somebody is putting out Benin to speak or something like that.
It's Joe's, your family members who have put something in the chat, and one of them wanted to say something. So
sure, what did they say?
Joe was disempowering them. I wanted them to talk, and Joe was
also there's Peggy, there's Joy, there's
what did they say?
They'd like to say something and acknowledge you.
Oh, they want to say something, but at the time, it's up to you.
Joe, I overruled you. Joe, you are overruled. Your family has to talk. Okay. Madam, are you there? Or is it any of the children who want to speak?
I am here. My name is Peggy.
This Peggy.
Yes.
Peggy, please, you have the floor. That
Joe,
has been overruled.
Thank you. Joe, very much champon. Ayuko Papebi. On behalf of the family, Sotam, I wish to congratulate you, and I wish I wish God to bless you for the work that you have done. Integration, honestly, I think we need integration. And I will urge governments to also look at legal instrument that binds countries from even extricating themselves to do more integration. So, Joe, I pray that your colleagues will carry the torch forward and continue to do the work so that in about 3, 4, 5 years' time, when you return, they will give good account of what they have also done on integration. We wish you well, and we hope to see you soon. Joe, Ayiko, and Akwaba. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peggy. Joe, you have 2 minutes.
Okay. I'll just take 1 or 2. Messi, we have a project with you. I have a deal with you that we need to. I have a deal with you that we need to do the work on the creative industry and their contribution to regional integration. So that's a deal which we would work on. The question of taxes, which is a bigger question that we've been doing, Steve, here in the ECA on the domestic resource mobilization. Your question is apt. Yes, we need to do more in terms of how we can get taxes, because there are places where even property taxes are not being collected, and our tax base is very low. And so we need more work to be done. ECA at times sent peer learning groups to Kenya recently to learn how they're able to mobilize resources. There are other good examples we can learn. But I agree with you that in order for us to become sufficient, we need to find a better way of mobilizing resources, and one of them is the tax system. I think the rest of them, Mark is always diplomatic in the way he praises the AFCFTA, and like Mark and I and many people, we have faith in the AFCFTA, but at times we have to be critical because we need more. Right, that's the only thing that we need, and you know very well that the AFCFTA was built on the archies of the regs, but we are not seeing the regs being the front and center of the AFCFTA. And so my plea to our good friend, His Excellency Wamkele, is to get closer to the regs and to help so that we can get this. I'm not a big fan of this guided trade. I must be honest with you. I think it's a diversion. It's diversionary. What we need is to go straight into trading and get people trading. So that's how I look at it. But I would like to also take this opportunity to recognize the work that Mark Pearson has done for us in terms of on the continent on trade facilitation issues and all that. I think he's one of the pillars. So I've learned a great deal from him. He's very kind with his words. With the question of Lamine, the rest are all thank yous. Ida, you are my big sister. What can I say? You are a wonderful woman. Thank you for your kind words. Yes, ICT and development is very key, and you were very instrumental in terms of making that work, the work ECA did on ICTs. But unfortunately, for reasons best known to the leadership of the ECA, we stopped going in that direction. To Lamine, you are my brother. Our partnership was great. We did a lot together, and we'll continue to do work together, in our own ways. The one thing I wanted to mention was that in terms of the work that you said about one border stop, one of the advantages that we could use in terms of my crazy idea of getting Africans to move freely is for us to use artificial intelligence on our borders so that the trucks even don't stop, so that the artificial intelligence can be used to scan the trucks as they go. I know that people will be skeptical that the trucks may be carrying drugs or something. But, between Canada and the US, they don't stop that much, So we want to get rid of the borders. And so when we get rid of the borders, I think artificial intelligence will be important. Francis, on your point on leadership in terms of the critical times of when we had, it's in the paper, the rough draft of my paper, but I need to discuss with you further, because at times I find it difficult when people say, we don't have leaders anymore. I think it's an insult to the presidents, the leaders, heads of states that we have. So we have to probably do it in a different way, to encourage them to stand up. Like for instance, the reform that President Kagame took in terms of the AU. It was a bold effort. The 0.2 would not have happened without him and the late Idris Deby. So it's something that we do. But I can understand where you are coming from in that sense, But again, Francis, you are in a very good position as the chief of regional integration. You can, you can inspire us with all your questions that you're asking. You have power in terms of what they are setting the agenda for ECA, and so you can use that to answer these questions but let me stop here, but to thank all of you. It's been a wonderful experience, and you have been patient. It's past 6 o'clock and you're still here. I think it's because of the people who spoke, but not me. But you've been a wonderful colleagues, and I would greatly, miss each one of you because, and I'll carry you in my heart every time I go. I don't know what would happen on the 1st of September when I no longer have to say I am an ECA staff, but I know that with you, the struggles and what we want to do, it will still continue. We'll continue from wherever I am if I can. In whatever capacity that I can contribute, I will contribute, even if it's pro bono. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. I think the beauty of a journey is how it ends. Joe, you are ending this journey very well on a very, very high note. It's not always been a bed of roses for you in terms of your journey and struggles in ECA. There have been low moments, there have been high moments. For those who've been close to Joe, very low moments in his journey. And you are ending this journey on a very high note, on a very beautiful note. We thank God for you and we wish you good health and long life. Robert?
Thank you. Thank you, Said. I think that you asked me to do the vote of thanks because you wanted me to be short because I could speak for a very long time about Joe, how time really flies. I remember when Joe came 20 years ago, or a bit more, I was here. I had just come as well. And Joe was my chief at that time. So here's my boss. But I think Joe is someone who is full of dignity. And one thing about dignity, and we were told this morning, is about recognition and inclusiveness. And Joe recognizes what people do. I think, in fact, he exaggerates how I have contributed to his knowledge of regional integration. He doesn't miss the opportunity to tell everyone that anything he knows about integration is me. He is exaggerating, but I think that is a sign of dignity. I think Said and I, we were thinking about the timing of this seminar for Joe. We felt that it was a difficult time because it is July, when many people are on holidays. But we are pleased with the very high turnout today. We want to thank everyone who has come here, starting with the dignitaries. And they were very high level people, our former executive secretaries, Kiawaya Marco, there was Hakim Benamuda, our former director. He was my director and Joe's director as well. Very high level personalities from the African Union Commission as well. Commissioner Muchanga represented, but also the former deputy chair of AUC. I think this is all testimony of the recognition of the work that Joe has done to the continent. I used to joke with Joe that Oga, you are very well connected person. He says that I'm joking, but I think the fact we have seen today, the caliber of people who have turned out for this seminar lecture speaks volume about Joe's connectivity. Joe used to joke that he was working a lot. It was not a joke, and I can say it now. A lot. He was working with the executive secretary at the time. And one of his first reporting officers said they cannot do his EPAS because they don't know what he's doing. He's working more with the executive secretary. But we thank all the executive secretary and the senior staff who came today. We also want to thank the colleagues who have come here from the SROs, Mama, Jean-Luc. I think I see also our friends from IDEP. Bakari, I see Amadou from SRO, West Africa. We want to thank you. I think you came for the meeting that is happening in APRM. Some of you participated in the meeting this morning, but we thank you for staying back to be part of this seminar for Joe. Obviously, we want to thank the wife of the Vice President of Ghana. The Vice President would have been here with us again to show the contribution Joe has done to the continent and to his country. I used to joke with Joe whether he's a Ghanaian or a Canadian. He's an African. But we thank the wife of the Vice President for spending some time with us. We know how difficult this could be with a very tight schedule. Yes. We also want to thank some of our colleagues who have been working in the background. I think that without them, this would not have been possible. I'm talking about Fesum, who is sitting quietly in front there.
and also Fedus, who worked with us to do all the beautiful flyers, Messi and colleagues in the knowledge. This time we could see Joe's face everywhere. If you see all the screens and all the posters, so those are the people we have to thank for that. But get the other UN colleagues who are here. Joseph, Joe used to say that when we were in the trenches, I think you have seen some of the people you were with in the trenches. We thank also the UNDP colleagues who are here. We hope this will not be the end. It's just the start. Many colleagues are going to leave, and they have a lot of experience which they could share their perspectives when going. So I thank you all on behalf of myself and Said, and also the DS Hanan, who is here. I think she, on short notice, had to intervene very good contributions and perspectives on the presentation that Joe has made. So with that said, I pass the floor back to you, and thank you. Without you and support and encouragement, I don't think we would have done this for Joe. So thank you very much, Said, and back to you. Thank you very much. I think we've come to the end of the proceedings of today. Let's wish Joe well. And we've not had the last of Joe. I would like to see Joe in Ghana in a new capacity. Thank you, and God bless.
Hey, so this is Dishant from UNECA University Common Application. I recommend you to watch AAU television.
AAU TV is the place to be for every person in higher education in Africa. Better be there or be nowhere.
Continuez de regarder la télé et surtout sur le AAU. Keep watching it and it will change the way you interact with higher education on the continent. AAU, great job.
I want to tell you that AAU television